Year 1817, James Monroe assumed the presidency of a young and tested United States. The nation was still finding its footing, proud but wary after its second confrontation with Great Britain in the War of 1812. This conflict, though ending in a stalemate, had forged a stronger sense of national identity and a deep-seated desire for security. The world beyond America's shores was in turmoil. Across Latin America, colonies were casting off the yoke of Spanish imperial rule, creating a power vacuum that tempted the old monarchies of Europe. It was in this charged atmosphere of opportunity and peril that President Monroe prepared to make one of the most consequential statements in American history. The core challenge was clear. How could this fledgling republic secure its own backyard without being dragged into the endless, costly conflicts of the Old World? European empires, particularly the Holy Alliance of Russia, Prussia, Austria. They spoke openly of restoring Spanish dominion in the Americas. For the United States, the prospect of powerful monarchical European armies landing once again in the Western Hemisphere was an existential threat. Monroe and his brilliant Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, knew that a clear and forceful message was needed, one that declared American resolve without committing the nation to binding, entangling alliances it could not afford. The result was the Monroe Doctrine, delivered to Congress in December of 1823. It was not a treaty or a law, but a declaration of principle. It was a statement of intent, delivered with the quiet confidence of a nation asserting its place in the world. The doctrine laid out two fundamental pillars: that the American continents were no longer open to future colonization by any European powers, and that the United States would in turn refrain from interfering in the internal affairs or wars of Europe. It was a bold proclamation of separation. Two hemispheres, two distinct political systems, and a warning to the old powers to keep to their side of the Atlantic. This policy was a masterstroke of strategic clarity. It did not seek to remake the world in America's image or to embark on a global crusade for democracy. Its aims were more focused and ultimately more protective of the young nation's core interests. The doctrine established a sphere of influence defined by geography and a principle of non-intervention defined by prudence. It was a policy of strength, but also a policy of limits. It told the world that America would be the master of its own neighborhood, but it would do so on its own terms, avoiding the very foreign entanglements George Washington had warned against a generation earlier. To understand the urgency behind the Monroe Doctrine, one must appreciate the world of the early 1820s. The United States had only recently seen its own capital, Washington, D.C., burned by British troops during the War of 1812, and the memory of foreign invasion was fresh and painful. The nation's borders were vast and in many places unsecured. To the south, a wave of revolutions had swept through Spanish America, giving birth to new, fragile republics like Mexico, Gran Colombia, Peru. Americans watched these struggles with a mixture of sympathy for fellow republicans and anxiety about the instability they created so close to home. This was not an abstract geopolitical game, it was about the security of their own frontiers. The message President Monroe delivered was remarkable for its directness and lack of ambiguity. He stated that the political system of the European powers was essentially different from that of America. Any attempt to extend their system to the Western Hemisphere would be dangerous to our peace and safety. This was the heart of the doctrine. It was a clear line drawn in the sand geographically. Ideologically, the Americas were to be a zone of republicanism, independence, insulated from monarchical intrigues, dynastic wars of the Old World. It was a bold claim, framing the entire hemisphere as vital to U.S. security. The doctrine was a two-way street. While warning Europe to stay out of the Americas, Monroe pledged the U.S. would not involve itself in European wars. Non-interference in Europe and non-colonization both mattered. A distinctly American security formula maximized geographic advantages. The Monroe Doctrine was not simply a speech, it was a strategic framework that guided American action. In its early years, its power was primarily diplomatic and deterrent. The United States did not have the naval might to single-handedly enforce its will against a united European front. However, Monroe and Adams knew they were not acting in a vacuum. Great Britain, with its powerful Royal Navy, had its own strong economic reasons for wanting the new Latin American republics to remain independent and open to trade. While Adams had rejected a formal joint declaration, he knew that British interests were aligned with American policy. This unspoken alignment gave the doctrine teeth. European powers knew that any attempt to intervene in the Americas would likely be opposed not only by the United States, but also by the world's dominant naval power. This demonstrates a key aspect of the doctrine's application: the shrewd use of diplomacy and shared interests to achieve goals without formal alliances. The United States did not bind itself to Britain with a treaty. It simply stated its own policy, confident that other nations, acting in their own self-interest, would help uphold it. This allowed America to maintain its independence while benefiting from a favorable balance of power. The warning was American, but the enforcement was implicitly backed by the guns of the Royal Navy, a fact that gave the chancellors of Europe pause. The genius of the Monroe Doctrine lay in its unique blend of strength and caution, a concept one might call muscular restraint. The policy was muscular because it made an audacious claim that a single young republic could forbid the powerful empires of Europe from acting in an entire hemisphere. This was not a humble request, it was a firm warning. The language used was that of a great power, confident in its rights and resolved to defend them. It projected an image of American strength and determination, telling the world that the United States would not be a passive observer to events that threatened its fundamental security. Yet this muscularity was carefully balanced with restraint. The doctrine explicitly renounced foreign adventures entangling alliances. It was a promise to defend America's neighborhood, not to police the world. The United States preserved its freedom of action. It would not be automatically dragged into conflicts that did not serve its interests. It was a policy designed to keep America safe. The enduring strength of the Monroe Doctrine is that it was a policy of action, not abstraction. It was not a vague wish for a better world, but a concrete strategy for dealing with the world as it was. Its success was measured in real-world outcomes. Foreign threats deterred regional stability, maintained the nation kept out of debilitating wars. The young republic grew into a world power on its own terms, free from entangling alliances. The doctrine's core lesson is principled power. First, clarity is strength. State your interests clearly. Don't invite tests. Monroe's warning left no room for miscalculation. Second, power guided by prudence. Defend your neighborhood. Avoid unwinnable crusades. Match commitments to capabilities. Third, self-reliance over dependency. The US acted on its own authority, not by riding Britain's coattails. Prefer temporary coalitions over permanent obligations. Don't outsource security to other nations or international bodies. Monroe offered a path to greatness without becoming a European mirror. Strong, but not aggressive. Sovereign, but not isolated. A leader in its hemisphere, not an overlord. For leaders and citizens today, the Monroe Doctrine remains an inspiration. Know your interests. Speak with clarity. Act with strength. Jealously guard your freedom of action.